Hello, everybody. Well, Pop's here, and we've got another chapter of our book complete. And so we're going to continue our story time with this chapter. If you want to catch the first chapter, you can catch it on this YouTube channel. This will be the second chapter. And again, I welcome all comments, positive or negative, as long as they're done in a constructive manner. Anyway, we've continued our writing, so let's read the next chapter here. The massacre had come without warning, an unprovoked slaughter. Orcs assaulting the village of farmers and craftsmen, swinging battle axes that dealt mortal blows. Human mages casting balls of fire that killed those targeted and set homes ablaze. Swift and merciless, the annihilation of the entire village had been, except for the 5 survivors spared by fate and the playfulness of young adults who sought imaginary adventures outside the village gates. Unaware and hidden within the confines of a small cave, the 5 had spent the afternoon seeking treasure and glory against foes that existed only in the creation of their minds. Throughout the early morning and into the afternoon, the adventures continued. Hundreds of mages, orcs, goblins, and even a few dragons fell victim to their blades and spells. Precious gems, enchanted weapons, scrolls of magic, and golden coins rewarding their efforts. David, the tallest and oldest, was their leader, courageous, skillful in the art of combat with sword and shield. Standing over 6 feet tall, ginger locks that cascaded to his shoulders adorned his handsome face, partially obscured by a nearly trimmed mustache and beard. Broad-shouldered, huge-chested, and with arms as big as an oak sapling. His brother Jack on his left flank, his long ginger hair hanging in braids along the contours of his narrow face to settle mid-torso between his shoulders and back. Being slightly less muscular, Jack relied on his agility to survive the many adventures, parrying, dodging, and blocking his foe's strike. In each hand he wielded daggers, their blades sharp and dipped in deadly poisons that drained the life of his enemies. Derek, the youngest of the 3 and the biggest, preferred charging into combat, wildly swinging a 2-handed battle axe whose blade decapitated, maimed, and granted eternal life to all who stood in its path. Behind the 3 brothers, Angie, blonde of hair, slim, athletic in build, garbed in cloth robes, knowledgeable in the arts of healing, chanted her spells that mended wounds and returned life to those who fought to protect her from harm. And while Andy chanted and channeled her energy in healing, Keegan, the youngest and smallest of the 5, with the use of his staff, focused his energies into spells that tossed fireballs, frostbolts, lightning strikes, and other harmful effects at those they attacked or sought to defend themselves from. When at last the final enemy had been defeated, and the treasure he hoarded divided up evenly between the 5 of them, they returned to the real world. It was time to put away their imaginary weapons and spellbooks. Time to return to their families, duties, and responsibilities. They chatted like squirrels in a tree, gibbering to one another of their afternoon adventures, each boasting of the number of enemies slain on the heroic deeds performed in the service of one another, as they walked across the great field towards the small mountain pass that would lead them home. Rojan showed no emotion as he examined the faces of the mutilated corpses from atop his steed. His army of orcs and humans scoured the decimated village, retrieving corpses and dragging them into the open, allowing their master to continue to search the faces of the dead. Exactly what he was searching for they did not know or care. They were soldiers, loyal to Rojan, and did as they were instructed without question. At last the final corpses were brought forth and laid out for his inspection. It was not until Rojan had studied the faces of the deceased several times that a rather large orc approached him, bowed, and in the guttural language of the orc spoke. "Have you found what you seek, my lord?" inquired the orc. "What I seek is obedience and for my orders to be carried out without question," Rojan responded, anger and frustration evident in his reply. "Yes, my lord," the orc replied, bowing. "If I may, my lord, your orders were followed. What remains of the village is just ashes and all those within were slaughtered and now lie dead on the grass in front of you." "So you say," Rojan retorted. "My orders were to slay all the villagers, yet those I seek are not here. Can you explain this?" "No, my lord. It would have been unlikely that they were able to escape. We attacked from all sides, and any who attempted to leave would have been spotted doing so. Perhaps those you seek were not in the village when we attacked," offered the orc. Sitting atop his mount, Rojan considered slaying the orc, igniting his green flesh with a simple fireball spell. However, Zurak was a loyal and faithful advisor. Besides, the other orcs looked up to Zurak, and it would serve no purpose to demoralize them by slaying Zurak. After a few moments, Rojan turned his gaze back to Zurak and spoke. "Have our war party pull back into the forest. We shall remain hidden and wait to see if those I seek return." "Yes, my lord." Zurak again bowed and then scurried off to gather up the war party and lead them into the forest, much relieved that he, himself, was permitted to live. With a subtle kick of his heels, Rojan urged his mount to a slow trot as he rode towards the forest. Rojan again studied the faces of the dead, satisfied again that those he sought were not amongst them. He turned his back to the carnage, galloping off to join the rest of the war party, which was just now reaching the edge of the forest. Along the perimeter, where the meadow met the edge of the forest, orc sentries were posted. Should anyone approach the decimated village, these sentries would alert the rest of the war party. Those orcs who were not assigned sentry duty were pulled back deeper in the canopy and camouflage of the forest. The orcs, whom did not trust those gifted with magic, huddled together, sharpening their weapons, cleaning and oiling the blades that had earlier tasted blood in silence. The mages busied themselves inventorying pouches, preparing the components that should they be needed, would allow them to cast balls of fire, bolts of frost, defensive shields, or other spells that they would be called upon to unleash in battle. Rojan, still sitting atop his mount, situated himself between the orcs and the mages. He observed the activities of both camps, satisfied that should another battle, or what had passed for a battle earlier, be necessary, his war party would be victorious. The fact that Rojan remained atop his mount was twofold. First, being only 5 feet and a few inches in height, the mount allowed him to appear larger, the additional height giving off the illusion of a larger man, and second, being the only member of his war party mounted, left no doubt as to who was in command. Rojan's frame was on the slender side, long strands of silver hair that fell about his shoulder and surrounded a face that bore sky-blue eyes and premature wrinkles of age, the cost of wielding powerful magic. He was adorned in purple robes, the 2 crossed battle axe insignia prominently displayed on his chest. Like all mages, he wore a leather belt about his thin waist. As with most magic users, several pouches hung from about his waist, secured in place by the leather belt. Underneath his robes, he wore a plain brown leather tunic with matching leather breeches that were tucked into a pair of high brown leather boots. With his right hand, he gripped the reins of his mount. His left hand wrapped about a slender staff of oak, atop of which sat a dark purple crystal, a source of his great power. It was the crystal that allowed Rojan to channel his magic, magnifying the effect of his spells. The afternoon sun, having completed its slow trek across the sky, was now beginning to dip low on the horizon. Frustrated at having spent an afternoon concealed in the woods, Rojan was ready to give the order to Zurich to prepare the war band for its return march to the keep, leaving behind a few select party members to continue the vigil, an order that was interrupted as one of the sentries approached the camp. Standing alongside Rojan's mount, having been summoned by his master seconds ago, Zurich turned slightly to face the approaching sentry. "Humans come," whispered the sentry, or what passed for a whisper in Orcish. "How many?" inquired Zurich. 5. 3 men, 1 female, and a small man, was the sentry's reply. Turning his back to the sentry, Zurich relayed the short conversation to Rojan. "I want them alive. Any major orc who kills or harms them will die a slow, painful death," warned Rojan. "Go gather the orcs. I will gather mages. We move now." "Yes, my lord." Zurich bowed slightly and headed for the band of orcs. Rojan guided his mount to the small group of mages. He relayed his orders, emphasizing that he wanted them alive and unharmed, along with the punishment for any who disobeyed his orders. The war party assembled. They began the short march out of the concealment of the forest, the sentries abandoning their posts to join the others as they entered the openness of the meadow. The 5 would-be adventurers came to a sudden stop as they reached the top of a small hill. In the fading afternoon-evening sunlight, they stood in disbelief. What should have been a welcoming sight was no more. Their homes were gone. Only ashes and swirls of smoke that danced in the afternoon breeze remained to greet their return. Derek and Jack were the first to react, breaking into an all-out sprint. They had only gotten a few yards when David called out for both of them to stop. Coming to a halt, both looked back at the older brother with questioning looks upon their faces. David walked over to where his 2 brothers stood, Angie and Keegan following. "Why did you stop us?" Jack asked. "Mom, Dad, and the rest of the village will need our help. We can't just stand here and do nothing." "I know, but we need to be careful," David warned. "If the village was under attack, there may still be enemies about." "Attacked? Are you serious? Who would want to attack our homes? We are farmers and craftsmen. We have no enemies. You can stay here if you like, but I am going down there to help," said Derek. "Are the rest of you coming with me?" "We will all go," David announced. "However, let's just be cautious and be on our guard until we know that there are no enemies about." Nodding their heads in agreement, they set off towards home, David taking the lead. Slowly they moved, everyone on the alert. 5 sets of eyes scanning the area, searching for anything that would indicate danger awaited their arrival. Closer and closer they came, with each step it becoming more apparent that it was no accident that had set their homes ablaze. Having gotten close enough to discover the corpses of their friends, family, and loved ones laid out on the green grass of the meadow, all caution was abandoned as panic and grief consumed them. In a mad dash they ran, stopping to stand alongside those who had been slaughtered. Moving from corpse to corpse, fighting the urge to vomit, tears flowing freely from their eyes, they desperately prayed for some sign of life. Immersed in their efforts, they did not notice the orcs and mages who were now emerging from the forest. Rojan and his war party watched the 5 villages as they crept toward their home. They were moving slowly, cautiously, searching for an unknown enemy they did not know existed. He saw them as they discovered his grim handiwork, the 5 of them racing to the aid of those beyond help. Onward came Rojan, the orcs and mages fanning out across the meadow to surround those who so far had failed to notice the threat that was closing in on them. Smiling sadistically, his eyes never leaving those whom he sought, he relished in their suffering. Raising the staff clutched in his left hand, a signal to his war party, he brought it down suddenly. Orcs and mages, having seen the signal, broke out in a run. Battle axes were held high, war cries shattered the silence of the meadow, and 5 villages looked up in horror as the orcs and mages eradicated the distance between them. Frozen by fear, unable to run or defend themselves, the 5 surrendered to the war party. Their hands were bound and a rope was fastened about their necks. Having secured the prisoners, the orcs and mages began to back away, forming a semicircle behind the captives. Rojan moved in closer to study the faces of those bound in front of him. Zurich, standing alongside the mountain Rojan, waited patiently for acknowledgement that these were whom he sought. Tearing his gaze from the villages, Rojan smiled and, nodding his head, confirmed to Zurich that indeed these were the ones he had come for. "You have done well, Zurich. Take them to the keep and make sure no harm comes to them along the way. You and the rest of the war party shall feast upon your return. You have made your lord very happy this day." "Thank you, my lord," Zurich bowed slightly. "We shall do as you ask, and I will personally see that no harm comes to them. And as for you 5, you shall spend the rest of your lives rotting in prison cells." "The prophecy has failed," Rojan addressed the 5 survivors. "Prophecy? What prophecy?" David asked, at last finding his voice. It was a question that would remain unanswered for now. All right, well, there you have it. There is the second chapter. Again, if you missed the first chapter, you can find it on this YouTube channel. Again, I welcome all comments, good or bad, as long as they are constructive and not rude. And I hope everybody's enjoyed the second chapter. And stay tuned. We are currently now working on the fourth chapter. And once that is complete, we will be adding the third chapter to this YouTube channel. Anyways, I hope everybody enjoyed the story. And we will catch you all later.